It started with a lawn chair. Yep, a $20 folding chair from Walmart. I set it on my front porch, pointed it toward the sunset, which just happened to be in the same direction as my neighbor Karen's house. That's when she snapped. She called the cops, said I was spying on her. And she had no idea that one day I'd be holding the keys to her house while she stood outside in tears. It was a Friday evening in Oak Ridge Meadows, the kind of upper-middle-class neighborhood where the air always smelled faintly of overpriced mulch and fake politeness. I had been living there for 6 months, keeping to myself, paying my HOA fees, and quietly judging how absurdly controlling they were. I wasn't a troublemaker. At least, not until Karen. Karen lived directly across the street. She wasn't technically on the HOA board, but she might as well have been their president. She knew every clause in the rulebook like it was a Bible, and she treated anyone who stepped out of line like they had personally insulted her ancestors. That night, the sunset was beautiful, streaks of orange and purple lighting up the sky. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, unfolded my old camping chair, and set it on my porch. It faced west. Unfortunately, west also meant directly toward Karen's property. 10 minutes into enjoying my drink, I noticed movement across the street. Karen was peeking through her blinds like she was a spy in a bad 80s movie. I ignored her. 5 minutes later, she stormed out of her house wearing her pink tracksuit that made her look like a low-budget Bond villain. Karen, excuse me, why is your chair facing my home? Me, because that's where the sun is. Karen, don't play smart with me. This is creepy. You're watching me. This is harassment. Me, Karen, I'm literally watching the sky. Unless you've moved your living room to the clouds, I think you're safe. She gasped like I had just confessed to arson and marched back inside. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. Officer number 1. Sir, we got a call about suspicious activity. The neighbor says you're spying on her. Me, with a lawn chair and a beer. Officer number 2, trying not to laugh apparently so. After a brief conversation, they left, clearly realizing how ridiculous it was. But Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, smirking like she'd won. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be the last of her nonsense. The very next morning, I received an official-looking letter from the HOA in my mailbox. It claimed I was creating an unsafe and uncomfortable environment for other residents and ordered me to reposition any outdoor seating away from directly facing another home. Yes, apparently the direction of my lawn chair was now a community issue. I called the HOA office and got Debbie, the kind of overly cheerful receptionist who sounded like she was reading from a script. Me, is this a joke? Debbie, sir, we take all resident complaints seriously. Me, even ones about which way a chair is pointing. Debbie, if it makes a neighbor uncomfortable, yes. That's when I realized Karen didn't just think she owned the street. She practically did. She'd manipulated the HOA into enforcing her personal vendettas. I decided to be civil. I turned my chair a few degrees so it technically wasn't directly facing her house. Thought maybe she'd calm down. She didn't. The next week, she complained that my lawn chair was too close to the sidewalk and posed a tripping hazard. I moved it back. Then she said my umbrella was an eyesore and clashed with neighborhood aesthetics. Then she accused me of making her dog bark intentionally by existing outside. It was clear this wasn't about the chair. This was about control. The final straw came when I returned from work one day to find a citation from the HOA taped to my door, along with a printed photo of me sitting in my chair. The letter accused me of continued surveillance of a neighboring property and threatened a fine of $500 for noncompliance. Karen had taken pictures of me on my own porch and sent them to the HOA. That night, as I sat in my chair, facing her house out of pure spite, I realized something. Karen thought she had all the power. She thought the HOA could bully me into submission. She had no idea who she was dealing with, because I wasn't just some quiet neighbor with a lawn chair. I had money. I had patience. And most importantly, I had the kind of stubbornness that turns petty feuds into all-out wars. And in wars, I don't lose. The day after I got that ridiculous $500 citation, I sat at my kitchen table staring at it like it was a personal challenge. Karen had made this war official, and I wasn't going to waste my time with little jabs anymore. If she wanted me gone or controlled, I'd take the nuclear option, make her life so uncomfortable that she'd have no choice but to leave. I started by researching her property. Public records are a beautiful thing. In less than an hour, I had her full name, property tax history, mortgage information, and even the fact that she had taken out a home equity loan just 2 years ago. She wasn't exactly drowning in debt, but she wasn't bulletproof either. I called a buddy of mine, Marcus, who worked in a local real estate office. Marcus owed me a few favors from back when I helped him get out of a messy legal situation. I told him I wanted every piece of information on Karen's property value, comparable homes, and potential buyers in the area. He laughed when I told him why. "You're telling me this is over lawn chair?" "No, Marcus, this is over principle. The lawn chair was just the first battle." Marcus sent me the details that same afternoon. Her house was nice enough, but not perfect, needed some updates, had a roof that would need replacing soon, and, most importantly, was right in the middle of a buyer's market slump. It wasn't going to fetch top dollar, and she probably knew it. I wasn't planning to buy it outright immediately. No, I wanted to make her want to sell. To do that, I needed leverage. That's when I started laying the groundwork. I made a few anonymous calls to the HOA complaining about various issues around her property, overgrown bushes, paint that was fading on her shutters, even her mailbox being slightly tilted. I didn't have to lie. I just exaggerated. The HOA, in their infinite pettiness, sent her warning letters, one after another. It was poetic watching her get a taste of her own medicine. Then came phase 2. I called a local contractor I knew, one who wasn't exactly subtle. I hired him to do some necessary maintenance on my property, power washing at odd hours, leaf blowing at sunrise, even repainting my fence in the brightest white you could imagine. All legal, all within HOA rules, but conveniently noisy enough that her daily quiet coffee on the porch was now accompanied by the sweet soundtrack of industrial tools. Karen started glaring at me more often. She yelled across the street a few times, claiming I was intentionally disturbing her peace. I just smiled and waved, holding my beer like it was a trophy. About 3 weeks into my campaign, I noticed a for sale sign go up in the yard 2 houses down from mine. That was my opening. I made sure to casually chat with a real estate agent handling that listing, dropping hints about how I was interested in buying in the area and asking if she knew of any other potential upcoming sales. I made sure Karen overheard at least one of these conversations. The seed was planted, but I wasn't relying on passive strategy alone. I needed intel straight from the source, so I reached out to someone I knew would talk, her sister. They weren't close, but I'd met her once at a neighborhood barbecue and remembered she had a sharp tongue when it came to Karen. I found her on Facebook, sent her a friendly message about how's life, and after a few exchanges, I dropped a line about Karen's seeming stress lately. That's when she spilled it. Karen had been complaining about the HOA herself, saying she might just sell the place and move somewhere normal. Jackpot. From there, it was a matter of time and pressure. I increased the frequency of my perfectly legal annoyances, encouraged other neighbors to voice their concerns to the HOA about her yard, and subtly spread the word that Karen was thinking of moving. A month later, I saw her standing outside with a real estate agent. I almost laughed out loud. She was trying to act casual, but her body language screamed frustration. The day that for sale sign finally went up in her yard, I poured myself a drink, sat in my lawn chair facing her house, and toasted her from across the street. She scowled. I grinned. What she didn't know was at the moment she listed it, I had already lined up a shell buyer, a buddy of mine who would purchase a property so it wouldn't look like it was me. She would think she was selling to a random guy who just loved the neighborhood. In reality, she was about to hand her house to me on a silver platter. When Marcus called to tell me her asking price, I didn't even flinch. It was lower than I expected, probably because she wanted a quick exit. We made the offer that same week. It was accepted. She still had no clue who was behind it, and I wasn't about to tell her not until the day the keys changed hands. That day, I planned to sit in my lawn chair, beer in hand, and watch her move out, before casually walking across the street with a deed in my pocket. By the time the inspection process started, I was practically giddy. The inspector I hired was another friend of mine, Eddie, who knew how to make things look just a little more dire than they really were. Sure, Karen's roof wasn't falling apart, but Eddie's professional assessment pointed out every possible flaw: loose shingles, gutters nearing end of life, minor cracks in the driveway that he referred to as structural hazards. I knew what I was doing. Each item was ammunition for negotiating her price even lower. And sure enough, after the report came back, Marcus called me up with a grin in his voice. She's agreed to drop the price another $5,000 if you close in under 30 days. Done. While the paperwork moved forward, I kept playing the part of the harmless, quiet neighbor. I still sat in my lawn chair every evening, still smiled and waved at her. But I noticed she stopped waving back. Her smile, if she even attempted one, was a tight, forced kind that barely covered the annoyance boiling under her skin. I think she started to suspect that I was enjoying this a little too much. Then came the day she tried one last petty attack. I came home to find another HOA notice taped to my door, this time accusing me of excessive use of outdoor furniture. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my groceries. Karen was still trying to fight me with the HOA, even as she was packing her house into boxes. That's when I decided to twist the knife just a little deeper. I threw a going-away barbecue in my front yard. I invited every single neighbor except Karen. I positioned my grill so the smoke drifted right toward her property, and I made sure the music was loud enough that she couldn't ignore it. People laughed, kids played, burgers sizzled, and Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, glaring like the villain in a bad soap opera. As the moving trucks came a week later, I stayed quiet. I didn't even look at her until the very last moment. She closed the back of the U-Haul, wiped sweat off her forehead, and turned to lock her front door one final time. That's when I walked across the street. "Hey, Karen," I said casually. "You probably don't know this, but I just bought this place." The look on her face was everything I'd hoped for: shock, confusion, and pure rage all tangled together. Her mouth opened like she was about to say something, but nothing came out. She just shook her head, muttered something under her breath, and stormed to her car. I stood in her, now my, driveway, watching her drive away, then turned to the moving truck driver and said, "Put my lawn chair right in the front window." That night, I sat in my new living room, facing my old house with a beer in hand. The war was over. I had won. You'd think that was the end, right? Karen gone, house mine, sweet victory wrapped in a bow. But here's the thing about people like her: they don't just vanish. They stew, they plot, and when they come back louder, pettier, and a whole lot more desperate. I thought buying her house was a grand finale. I didn't realize it was just the end of Act 1. Karen's exit from Oak Ridge Meadows was supposed to be the final page in the book. I pictured her moving into some other neighborhood far away, maybe terrorizing a new set of neighbors, and me sitting comfortably in the house she once guarded like a dragon over treasure. But 2 weeks after she left, my phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. His voice had that tone, half laughing, half nervous. "Hey, so you might want to sit down for this." I was already sitting, sipping coffee in my new living room. "What's up?" "Karen just bought a house." I snorted. "Good for her." "Yeah, it's 2 streets over." At first, I didn't believe him. I thought maybe it was a joke. But Oak Ridge Meadows wasn't that big, and it didn't take long to verify it. Karen had actually moved within walking distance. I could still see her if I cut through the backyards and took the right turns. It didn't take long for her to make her presence known. On the 3rd day after her move, I got a letter in my mailbox, not from the HOA, but from Karen herself. Handwritten, in that tight, angry script people get when they are holding in too much rage. "Enjoy my old house while you can. I will see to it that you regret every smug grin and every beer you drank in that lawn chair. This is not over." Most people will be unsettled by that. I wasn't. I was thrilled. See, Karen didn't understand that I wanted her to escalate. Every step she took gave me another opportunity to push back harder. The first counter came a week later. I noticed a strange SUV parked across the street from my new place, engine idling, driver pretending to look at his phone. The next day, the same SUV appeared again. Then again. I finally walked over, rapped on the driver's window. The man rolled it down reluctantly. He was mid-40s, wearing a cheap button-up shirt. You lost? I asked. No. Just waiting for someone. Who? Karen. He looked embarrassed the moment he said it. Apparently, Karen had hired him to monitor my property for HOA violations. He wasn't even subtle. He admitted she was paying him cash under the table to photograph me if I broke any rules. I smiled. Do me a favor. Tell her the only thing I'm violating is a peace of mind. I knew exactly how to deal with this. The next day, I positioned my lawn chair directly in the front yard, placed a huge banner behind me that read, "Private property, no trespassing, smile for the camera." I sat there for hours, waving every time the SUV rolled by. A week after that, Karen struck again, this time filing a noise complaint with the HOA. She claimed my grill was operated beyond acceptable hours and produced odors disruptive to neighborhood enjoyment. Never mind that I'd only used it twice that week, and both times were before 8 p.m. I decided to make sure her complaints weren't just ignored. They backfired. I invited the HOA board members themselves over for cookout. I grilled steaks, burgers, ribs, the whole works. When they complimented the food, I told them Karen had complained that my cooking was a nuisance. They laughed, shook their heads, and I saw in their faces what I'd been hoping for. They were starting to see Karen not as a victim, but as a chronic problem. Still, I knew she wouldn't stop. And she didn't. 2 months into her new residency, she trespassed. I caught her on my security cameras, walking right up to my porch, peering through my front windows like she was casing the place. When I opened the door, she actually had the audacity to act surprised. "Oh, I thought this was still my house." "It's not. And the next time you step onto this property, I'm calling the police." "You wouldn't dare." "Karen, I own this house. I dare." I filed a trespassing report that afternoon, just to make sure there was a record. I didn't expect it to scare her off completely, but it added a legal weapon to my arsenal. That's when I decided the time had come for my big move. See, the HOA had a provision most people didn't pay attention to. If a homeowner had more than 3 unresolved violations in a 6-month period, the board could take legal action to force compliance, or, in extreme cases, place a lien on the property. Karen had been so busy attacking me that she'd been neglecting her own yard. The grass was overgrown. Paint was chipping on her shutters. She still hadn't fixed the leaning mailbox I complained about months earlier. So, I started documenting everything. Photos, dates, detailed notes. I filed complaints, not anonymously this time, but signed in bold letters. Every time I submitted one, I mailed her a copy with a smiley face drawn in Sharpie. 3 months later, Karen's property had officially hit the violation limit. The HOA sent her a final notice, and I heard through Marcus that she'd been slapped with fines she couldn't ignore. But I wasn't done. I quietly reached out to a local investor I knew, one who specialized in buying distressed properties. I told him I had a lead on a house that might be available soon. When he asked who owned it, I smiled and said, "You'll know her when you meet her." The plan was simple. Squeeze Karen until selling became her only escape. Then make sure she sold it. To me. Again. And I'd already picked out the perfect spot for my lawn chair in her new front yard. She thought she could shadow me, harass me, and make my life miserable from 2 streets away. But she didn't realize something. If I could take her first house, I could take her second. And this time, I wasn't just buying property. I was buying the look on her face when she realized history was about to repeat itself. Do you want me to roll right into Chapter 5, where the second house takeover plan goes into full swing? That's where the revenge gets next level. By the time the leaves started changing color, my plan for Karen's second downfall was in full swing. Owning her first house had been satisfying, but this one was personal. She had moved within striking distance, kept up a harassment, and even hired someone to spy on me. She wasn't just a nuisance, she was a challenge. And challenges, to me, are puzzles begging to be solved. The first move was patience. You don't win battles like this with fast, sloppy plays. You let the enemy make mistakes. Karen was already giving me plenty to work with. Her new property was smaller and older than her last one, but she acted like it was a mansion. She didn't realize the upkeep was slowly breaking her budget. I started planting seeds. Not literally, though I did have my gardener accidentally blow leaves onto a lawn every week, but figuratively. I began mentioning to a few neighbors how Karen's house looked a little tired lately. I made sure these conversations happened where they could be overheard. In neighborhoods like Oak Ridge Meadows, reputation is currency. Within a month, I noticed her scrambling to repaint her shutters, trim her bushes, and fix that leaning mailbox. She was trying to keep up appearances, but each fix cost her money she didn't really have. The second move was financial pressure. Through Marcus, I found out she was still paying off debts from her move. She'd underestimated the cost of selling her first house and buying the second, and her credit card had taken a hit. That's when I made a call to a friend who worked for a local landscaping company. I told him I wanted to give Karen a special offer, a 2-bit-to-bedroom maintenance package at half the normal price. Of course, the deal was structured so that missing even one payment would trigger massive penalties. My friend pitched it to her as a way to boost curb appeal for the upcoming holiday season. She took the bait. 3 months later, she was behind on payments, arguing with the landscapers, and threatening to call her lawyer. All the while, I was building my case against her with the HOA. I documented overgrown patches in her backyard, cracks in her driveway, and peeling paint on her back porch. These weren't major violations yet, but they added to her growing list of headaches. The third move was social isolation. Karen thrived on having influence. In her mind, she was still the queen bee of Oak Ridge Meadows. I needed to take that away. I began hosting neighborhood events, cookouts, poker nights, even a small outdoor movie night for families, and I made sure she was never invited. More than that, I subtly spread the story of how she had called the cops on me over a lawn chair and tried to ruin my life. People laughed. They started keeping their distance from her. At HOA meetings, her complaints were met with eye rolls instead of nods. The queen bee was losing her hive. By spring, she was noticeably more irritable. She'd shout at delivery drivers for parking too close to her driveway. She left nasty notes on other people's trash cans. And then she made her biggest mistake. She tried to drag the HOA back into war with me. She filed an official complaint claiming my constant outdoor gatherings violated community noise standards. Unfortunately for her, the HOA board members she once influenced were now regulars at my events. They dismissed her complaint within 24 hours and sent her a warning about misuse of the HOA complaint system. That was the first visible crack in her armor. She was losing power fast. The final push came when I discovered she had taken out a short-term, high-interest loan to cover some unexpected repairs. That was my opening. I called the same investor I'd used before and told him to start sniffing around. He happened to knock on her door one afternoon, introducing himself as someone interested in buying in the neighborhood. She played coy at first, saying she wasn't selling. But I knew better. The moment someone in a position says those words, they're already thinking about it. The seed was planted again. I didn't wait this time. A week later, the investor returned with a casual offer lower than market value, but framed as a quick cash sale with no hassle. She refused, but her body language told a different story. That's when I escalated. My gardener, helpful as ever, managed to accidentally blow dirt all over her freshly painted shutters. My friends parked their trucks near her driveway on weekends. I even hired a marching band for a neighborhood charity event, knowing full well they'd set up near her street. All of it was legal. All of it was calculated to make her think, I hate living here. Within 2 months, she cracked. Marcus called me one Friday afternoon with the news. She's listing it. Wants a quick sale. Says she's done with this place. I couldn't hide the smile in my voice. Perfect. Get the paperwork ready. We ran the same play as before. My shell buyer made the offer. She accepted. And within a few weeks, the house was mine. Again. The best part? This time, I didn't even tell her until the day she moved out. She was sweating in the driveway, directing movers, when I pulled up in my truck. I walked over, holding the keys to her old house, the first one I'd taken from her. Deja vu, huh? I said with a grin. She froze, eyes wide, jaw clenched. You're sick. Maybe, but I'm also your landlord now. Her face twisted into a mix of rage and disbelief. She didn't say another word, just climbed into her car and slammed the door so hard it rattled. As I watched her drive away for the second time, I set my lawn chair on her, Now my front lawn, facing her new street, just in case she ever got the insane idea of moving back. Because if she did, I'd be ready to buy that one too. By the time summer rolled around, I thought the saga of Karen had finally ended. 2 houses, 2 victories, and 2 moments burned into my memory. The look on her face the day she realized she'd lost her first home, and then again when she realized she'd lost a second. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's that they are like cockroaches. Even when you think you've squashed them for good, they find a way to scuttle back into the light. The first sign came in the form of an envelope. No return address. Hand-delivered. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence. Enjoy my house while you can. She didn't even have the decency to sign it, but I didn't need a signature. I knew her handwriting. Now, I wasn't scared. Karen's threats were more bark than bite, but I was curious. She was supposed to be gone for good. Where was she? What was she planning? Marcus, ever the useful informant, did a little digging. 2 days later, he texted me a photo, Karen standing in front of the Oak Ridge Meadows HOA clubhouse, chatting animatedly with none other than Mrs. Pendleton, one of the board members. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. Karen was trying to worm her way back into the HOA's good graces. And in this neighborhood, influence was worth more than property lines. I decided to beat her to the punch. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I arrived early, brought donuts, and chatted with board members about community projects I'd love to help with. When Karen showed up 20 minutes late, the room already smelled like coffee and goodwill, and none of it was haze. Her smile faltered when she saw me sitting in the front row, nodding along as Mrs. Pendleton praised my commitment to the neighborhood. She still tried to speak during the open floor portion, but the moment she launched into a complaint about my constant provocations, the board shut her down. We're not here to revisit personal disputes, Mrs. Pendleton said curtly. That matter's been settled. I thought that might deter her. It didn't. 2 weeks later, she tried again, this time by weaponizing the one thing she knew still mattered to the HOA, property values. She filed an official petition claiming that I was undermining the community's aesthetic with my persistent displays of hostility. She included photos of me sitting in my lawn chair, facing her old house, beer in hand. It might have worked if she hadn't accidentally included a picture from her own backyard with weeds waist-high and paint peeling from a fence. The HOA dismissed the complaint again, but not before quietly noting the state of her new property. That's when I realized something important. Karen wasn't in a position of strength anymore. She was scrambling. Every move she made was reactive, desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. I started digging into her latest living situation. She was renting now, small house, much older than her last 2. And the kicker? Her landlord was the kind of guy who'd sell for the right price. You can probably see where this is going. I invited him to lunch. Casual conversation at first, whether local news, the usual. Then I steered the topic toward property. He admitted he'd been thinking about selling but wasn't sure if now was the right time. I told him I'd make it worth his while. 2 weeks later, the deal was in motion. But I didn't want to just buy the house. No, this time I wanted Karen to see it coming. I wanted her to feel that creeping dread every time she noticed me chatting with her landlord, every time she saw me walking past the driveway with a tape measure and a clipboard. And it worked. I'd catch her watching from her window, phone in hand, clearly debating whether to call the cops. She didn't, probably afraid of another public humiliation, but the paranoia was eating her alive. By the time the sale was finalized, she was already halfway out the door. I didn't even need to evict her. She broke her lease and left on her own, muttering about stalker neighbors and toxic communities. When I stepped into my newest acquisition, the third house Karen had lived in since calling the cops on my lawn chair, it felt almost surreal. 3 houses, 3 victories, and not a single rule broken. I set my lawn chair in the front yard that afternoon, not because I needed to enter more, but because it had become a tradition. If Karen never dared to move anywhere near me again, I'd be ready. 3 houses down, and Karen was running out of places to hide. But here's the thing about people like her. They don't just vanish. They wait. They plot. And somewhere out there, I knew she was already thinking about her next move. The question wasn't if she'd come back. It was when. And when she did, I'd be ready to end it for good. By the time the leaves turned gold again, it had been 6 months since Karen's last retreat. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learned a lesson. 3 houses, 3 humiliations, 3 clean defeats. Surely she'd pack up her ego and find another neighborhood to terrorize. But no. The first whisper came from Marcus. "You're not going to believe this," he said, barely able to hide his amusement. "She's back. Rented a place just outside Oak Ridge Meadows. Less than a mile away." I felt the slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. So, technically not in the neighborhood. Technically, Marcus said, but close enough to throw a rock at your mailbox if she wanted. Which, knowing Karen, was a real possibility. For the next few weeks, I played it cool. No sudden moves, no direct contact. I wanted to see what her game plan was this time. Would she try to sneak back into the HOA, start another smear campaign? Or maybe, just maybe, she'd learn to live in peace. Spoiler, she had not. The first shot she fired was almost laughable. Anonymous posts on the neighborhood Facebook group complaining about certain individuals who buy out property just to spite people. Of course, everyone knew she meant me, and just as obviously, no one cared. If anything, the comment section turned into a roast of her thinly veiled accusations. But Karen wasn't built to take public mockery gracefully, so she escalated. A week later, I came home to find someone had spray-painted Petty Loser across my driveway. She didn't sign her work, but again, I knew the style. Karen's brand of revenge was as subtle as a marching band in a library. Instead of scrubbing it off immediately, I decided to let it sit for a day. I called the HOA president, told him about the vandalism, and wondered if maybe it was part of a bigger safety concern. By the next morning, the entire board was buzzing about it, and so was the police department. Karen must have realized a little stunt could lead to actual legal trouble, because she went quiet for a bit after that. But quiet for Karen doesn't mean harmless. It means plotting. I figured if she wanted to play the long game, I'd beat her to it. Through some not-so-subtle social networking, I learned a new rental was owned by a guy named Doug. Doug wasn't particularly fond of being a landlord. Too much hassle, too many tenant complaints. When I casually brought up that I'd be interested in picking up more properties in the area, Doug perked up immediately. We started meeting for coffee once a week, just talking shop. I didn't bring up Karen at first, but I did mention the occasional problem tenants I'd had in the past and how I handled them with, let's call it, efficiency. Doug laughed, told me a few of his own horror stories, and I could see the idea forming in his head before I even suggested it. One Friday morning, over a particularly good latte, he said, "You know, I've been thinking about selling the place on Cypress Lane, the one I've got rented out right now." I kept my expression neutral. "Oh yeah? Any issues with the tenants?" He smirked. "Let's just say they're high maintenance." Deal done. When the papers were signed, I decided I wasn't going to surprise Karen this time. No, I wanted her to feel every inch of the trap closing. I walked right up to her door with the lease in my hand, knocked 3 times, waited. When she opened the door, the look on her face went from confusion to horror in half a second. "Hello, Karen," I said, voice dripping with faux politeness. "I'm your new landlord." She blinked, stammered, tried to slam the door. I caught it with my foot. "I'll give you 30 days to vacate. Standard notice. But honestly, I'm feeling generous. If you leave in 2 weeks, I'll waive the last month's rent." Her jaw dropped. "You can't do this." "Oh, I can," I said, handing her the paperwork. "And For the next 14 days, I watched her unravel. She muttered to neighbors, tried to rally them against me, even threatened to call the media. None of it worked. By the end, she was a husk of her former self, still angry, but too exhausted to fight. The day she finally drove away, stuffed car, moving van following close behind, I stood in the driveway, sipping a cold beer, and raised in a silent toast of my victory. 4 houses, 4 wins, and the neighborhood was quieter than it had ever been. I don't know where she went after that. Maybe she finally took the hint. Maybe she's lurking somewhere, plotting her comeback. But it doesn't matter, because if Karen ever comes back, I'll be ready. Petty wars aren't won by shouting the loudest. They are won by being patient, strategic, and just a little more stubborn than your enemy.